this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is a video to compare the Corsair K100 Air wireless, seen on the top here, and the Razer DeathStalker V2 Pro. These are two flagship keyboards from either company that deliver fantastic results and a curious setup with a number of different features and specs differences that are worth discussing. The K100 Air, at the time of making this video, is actually a little bit more expensive than DeathStalker V2 Pro, which is interesting for certain reasons. For example, that DeathStalker has optical switches, whereas the Corsair does not. There are some other things of highlight and interest between both of them, and some very slight subtle differences and some quite significant ones. You'll see the K100 Air, for example, is razor thin. It's really a lot thinner than the DeathStalker, whereas the DeathStalker is a little bit fat on the bottom, has a bit of a chunkier underneath to it, and that's because it's designed with a large battery, so it'll last and last. Up to 40 hours is the claim with the RGB on, and that results in this slightly bigger body, but other things of interest too. For example, it has 3 Bluetooth 5.0 connection options with switches at the back, and 2.4 GHz as well. The Corsair keyboard only has Bluetooth 4, so there are some subtle differences in the specs and the features, some that you'll be immediately obvious and some that aren't. You can see the Corsair has this brushed aluminium finish and a really funky back with some interesting highlights to it. Also has a nifty little dock for the USB dongle, and both keyboards use USB-C charging, so no micro USB, which is wonderful. You can see when I stack them both together though, just the size differences between the two. The Corsair keyboard has a really low profile setup and some quite sharp and angry looking angles. They are both flagships from the company, so you expect them to be packed with interesting specs. And the Corsair is particularly interesting because of the way the low-profile switches sit. But I'm going to start by talking about the DeathStalker V2 Pro, which is fairly understated in its design, in my opinion. The RGB isn't really bright, as you can see from these shots, and it has this interesting textured finish on the keycaps, which is designed to stop it from picking up loads of oils and dirt over time. You can pop off the keycaps and you'll notice that they have that sort of Cherry MX style to them and that finish there. And the interesting thing about this is they are low profile design switches. Obviously it sits really low profile, but they're also optical switches. So these are Razer's optical switches that are guaranteed up to 70 million clicks. They also are 1.2 millimeter actuation, 2.8 mils of total travel, and 45 grams of actuation force. Keep that all in mind and be sure to check out the details in the description on the specs, because Corsair's switch setup is vastly different to Razer's. And there's a lot to be said for the optical switches because of the accuracy and the longevity of them. As you can see, they're also pretty well stabilised. There is a little bit of wobble, and certainly a significant one when compared with the Corsair keyboard, because those key switches and caps are basically flush with the keyboard, so there's a lot less movement in there. However, I do think the DeathStalker is a good typing experience and a pleasant one that I enjoyed using, and I usually use the Logitech G915 TKL as my mainstay, and so this was an interesting move for that because of the optical switches, nice stabilization, comfortable keycaps, and overall a pleasant design as well. Another small thing that you will pick up on perhaps is the lettering is well etched on this keyboard, meaning that you can see not only the main lettering but also the secondary layer of actions and letters. For example, the $sign and the pound sign and other things on the number line. Curious little things like that make quite a difference really for the overall aesthetic of them, and obviously the style. Here you can see again a shot of them sort of side by side, showing you just how significantly lower the K100 Air is and how low the switches and the keycaps sit by comparison. So there's very little in terms of RGB light bleed from the K100 Air. That doesn't mean it doesn't have good RGB lighting though. It does have some nice RGB lighting on various different shots and different angles. You can see that, but you'll also notice just how significantly different the keycaps are. They really sit really low and you can't actually take them off. That's one of the things they told me, is not to take them off, not to remove them. This could present a problem over time if you do get dirt and dust in there, because it won't be as easy to clean. However, it is very comfortable to type on and gives a good experience in terms of the reaction for gaming. But they are Cherry MX switches, not optical switches. They're Cherry MX low profile switches. and they are tactile, so they are noisier than the linear switches on the Razer keyboard. They require 65 grams of actuation force, so a little bit more force, but they actuate at 0.8 millimeters, which is a very small press, and they only have a total travel of 1.8 millimeters as well. So because they're set so low, they activate really quickly and they bottom out really quickly as well. Again, there'll be a sound test at the end to show you the difference between these in terms of the sound they make, but the Corsair is a lot noisier in my experience and perhaps not as pleasant to type on because of it, but the keycaps have far less wobble. Now this keyboard has that slipstream wireless dongle, as you could see there, but you can also plug it in with the USB-C connection, and then you can get up to 8,000 hertz polling rate. So it has a much higher spec set up in terms of what you can do when it's not in wireless mode. You'll also see a number of different dedicated keys. In the top left, for example, you have a profile switching button, light switching, and a game mode which disables Windows key and Alt F4 and things like that. On the right hand side you have G keys, which is macro keys and also works with Elgato Stream Deck software, and you can see you can switch between wireless and 3 different Bluetooth modes. And you have dedicated media playback buttons, which includes a volume wheel and media controls. The volume wheel can actually be customized within Corsair's IQ software, so you can give it different actions both up and down, so you don't have to use it for volume control if you don't want to, so it is flexible in that way. However, I do really like having a volume wheel and media buttons on my keyboard because I regularly listen to music while I'm working, so it's nice to just be able to have access to those buttons. But you can see, despite its relatively small size, because it is a thin, obviously low profile, it doesn't have like extra stacked macro buttons on the left hand side like the previous Corsair flagships. Instead they're sort of nestled at the top where they're not really in the way, so it's not obnoxious in that way, and I think it's a really nice looking design. It's got that obviously solid brushed aluminium backplate. It feels nice and premium, and it just sits really low to the desk, which is brilliant for wrists. I think I feel like it's a nice typing experience with low profile on both these keyboards, because it just means you're not raising your wrist up when you're typing, and so you have a more comfortable experience throughout the day. Both of them are height adjustable, so you can see that. Now, Corsair claims up to 200 hours of battery life with the RGB off, or 50 hours with it on, and I actually did find that I was plugging it in less than I did the DeathStalker V2 Pro, but it's worth bearing in mind that the DeathStalker has optical keys, and that means there's an optical light beam for each and every key on the keyboard, as well as per key RGB. You also have an optical light beam, so it's understandable that it would require more power and wouldn't last quite as long as the K100, so it's worth bearing that in mind. And personally, I think that the specs on the DeathStalker perhaps make it a bit more appealing. I think I personally prefer the aesthetic visually of the K100, but the typing experience and the higher end specs potentially on the DeathStalker maybe sell it a bit more. Another thing worth noting is that the Razer keyboard's volume wheel is actually multifunction, so it rolls up and down, but it also pushes in, and then you'll have a tiny little button next to that, which is multi-action media playback as well, so you can press that once to pause and play music, double press it, triple press it, skip and rewind and things like that, so pretty intelligent setup. Now I'm going to leave you with a sound test so you can hear what the key switches sound like and the difference between them. Be sure to stick around and subscribe to see more content like this, and check out the links in the description to watch the full reviews to find out more about what I thought and see the software and other things. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.